On the frigid night of January 18th in downtown Chicago, 28-year-old waitress Maya Collins slammed a coffee pot down so hard it shattered, silencing the upscale diner as she stood her ground against Vincent Castellano, the city's most feared crime boss. Her voice cut through the tension like a knife as she defended an elderly customer from Castellano's intimidation, becoming the first person in a decade to publicly defy the man responsible for half the city's bloodshed. The restaurant's fluorescent lights captured every detail of Castellano's shock as coffee dripped down his $5,000 suit, while Maya's hands trembled with a courage born of desperation rather than bravery. This is the story of how a single mother working double shifts became entangled in a dangerous game of power, respect, and unexpected connection with a man who could end her life with a nod. Subscribe now to discover why the black card that appeared at Maya's apartment the next morning wasn't a death sentence, but something far more life-changing. Maya Collins's feet ached as she pushed through the final hour of her 12-hour shift at the Cardinal Diner. Located on the corner of Michigan Avenue and Lake Street, the 24-hour establishment attracted an eclectic mix of Chicago's late-night wanderers, drunk college students seeking greasy salvation, insomniac business people nursing cold coffee, and occasionally patrons who preferred their business dealings to occur away from prying eyes and surveillance cameras. At 34 minutes past midnight, Maya balanced 5 plates along her arms with the practiced precision that came from 8 years of waitressing. Her dark curly hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, revealing a face that, despite the exhaustion etched into the corners of her eyes, still maintained a determined set to her jaw. She hadn't bothered reapplying her lipstick after her dinner break 4 hours ago. There was no point. The tips wouldn't change, and she'd stopped caring about impressing the night crowd years ago. "Order up for table 7, she called, setting down plates of pancakes and eggs in front of a group of college-aged kids who barely looked up from their phones to acknowledge her. Maya didn't mind. Invisible was better than the alternative when it came to some customers. The bell above the door chimed, and a blast of January air swept through the diner, causing the laminated menus to flutter and several patrons to draw their coats tighter. Chicago winters showed no mercy, especially this close to the lake. Maya glanced up automatically, then felt her stomach tighten as 4 men entered. Even if she hadn't recognized Vincent Castellano from the occasional news reports about alleged crime boss activities that never seemed to result in convictions, she would have known these weren't ordinary customers. They moved with a kind of synchronized precision, scanning the diner's interior before choosing a booth in the back corner, the one with clear sightlines to both entrances. The tallest man, built like he demolished brick walls for a living, took position at the end of the booth rather than sitting, his heavy overcoat not quite concealing the bulge of what Maya strongly suspected was a firearm. The other 2 men, neatly dressed in dark suits despite the late hour, flanked either side of the booth, creating a protective barrier around the 4th man. Vincent Castellano looked nothing like the monsters from children's stories. At 50-something, he had the distinguished appearance of a successful business executive, salt and pepper hair immaculately cut, his Italian wool suit clearly tailored to his broad-shouldered frame. But it was his eyes that betrayed the fairy tale, cold, calculating amber that evaluated everything and everyone as assets or liabilities. Maya had heard the whispers everyone in Chicago had, how the Castellano family controlled everything from the docks to City Hall. How people who crossed Vincent had a habit of taking unexpected vacations to places from which they never returned. How his legitimate businesses, hotels, restaurants, construction companies, were merely the visible tip of a criminal empire that stretched back 3 generations. "Shit," muttered Dolores, the other night waitress, appearing at Maya's side. At 58, Dolores had been working at the Cardinal longer than some of their customers had been alive. Her heavily mascaraed eyes widened as she took in the new arrivals. "That's Vincent fucking Castellano." "I know who it is," Maya said quietly. "Your section or mine?" Yours? I'm not getting anywhere near that table. Dolores pressed a fresh pot of coffee into Maya's hands. Just keep the coffee flowing. Don't make eye contact too long, and for God's sake, don't spill anything on his suit. That thing probably costs more than we make in 3 months. Maya took a deep breath, straightened her slightly stained apron, and approached the table. Professional, efficient, invisible. That was the goal. She'd served other dangerous men before, not at this level, but Chicago had no shortage of people you didn't want to cross. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice steady and neutral. "Coffee while you look at the menus?" The two suited men looked to Castellano for direction. He gave a small nod without looking up from his phone. Maya poured 4 cups with practiced efficiency, then pulled her order pad from her apron pocket. "I'll give you a few minutes to decide. Eggs, scrambled, wheat toast. No butter," Castellano said, still not looking up. His voice was surprisingly soft, with just a hint of a lingering Italian accent. "And keep the coffee coming." The others quickly ordered steak and eggs for the 2 suits, nothing for the human wall standing guard. Maya nodded and retreated to the kitchen, feeling the tension in her shoulders release slightly once she was out of their sight line. "Orders up, Joe," she called through the pass-through window to the night cook, who raised his eyebrows when she mentioned table 12. "Those who they look like?" he asked quietly. Maya nodded. Christ! Joe was ex-military, not easily rattled, but even he looked nervous. "Tell Bobby to stay in the back. Kid doesn't need to be anywhere near that table." Bobby, the 19-year-old busboy saving up for community college, was currently refilling sugar containers in the back. Maya nodded her agreement. The fewer people interacting with Castellano's table, the better. For the next 20 minutes, Maya moved efficiently between her tables, keeping coffee cups filled and delivering orders with professional detachment. The college kids paid and left, replaced by a pair of cab drivers on their break. The elderly couple in the corner booth had been nursing the same piece of pie for over an hour, likely taking advantage of the diner's heat before returning to whatever situation awaited them outside. Every time Maya approached Castellano's table, she kept her gaze slightly averted, her movements precise. Pour the coffee, clear the empty creamer containers, deliver food without comment. She was just part of the diner's machinery, not a person to be noticed or remembered. It was working well until the bell chimed again, and 3 men who were clearly already intoxicated stumbled in, laughing too loudly and bumping into tables. Maya suppressed a groan. Drunk customers at 1 a.m. were never good news, especially when Chicago's most dangerous crime boss was sitting 20 feet away. "Yo, sweetheart," one of them called, sliding into a booth and slapping the table. "Coffee and whatever's hot." Maya nodded tersely and poured coffee for the trio, painfully aware of how the atmosphere in the diner had shifted. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as she felt Castellano's attention move from his quiet meal to the noisy newcomers. She could practically feel the displeasure radiating from his table. "I'll get your order in right away," she told the drunk men, hoping they'd quiet down once they got some food in their systems. No such luck. As Maya passed Castellano's table, she heard one of the drunk men loudly comment on her appearance in crude terms that made her jaw clench. She'd heard worse, but it still stung. "Hey, Ryan," one of the other drunk men said too loudly. "Isn't that the guy from the news?" "The mob guy?" Maya froze. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. She didn't dare look at Castellano's table, but she could feel the shift in energy like the air before a lightning strike. "What did you say?" The first drunk man turned, squinting across the diner. "Holy shit, it is. That's the Castellano dude." Maya closed her eyes briefly. This was about to go very badly. She set down her coffee pot and moved toward the drunk men's table. "Gentlemen," she said quietly but firmly, "I'm going to have to ask you to keep it down or take your business elsewhere." "We're paying customers," the loudest one slurred. "We can say whatever we want. Right, Vinny?" He raised his voice, directly addressing Castellano's table. "Free country and all that." The diner went utterly silent. Maya could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter, the tick of the old clock above the door. She didn't turn to look at Castellano, but she didn't need to. The faces of the drunk men told her everything. the way their expressions shifted from drunken bravado to dawning horror as someone approached from behind her. "Problem here?" The voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried a weight that sobered the drunk men instantly. Maya turned slowly. Vincent Castellano stood less than 3 feet away, his bodyguard hovering just behind him. Up close, she could see the fine stitching on his suit, smell the subtle cologne that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His eyes, however, were fixed on the drunk men, not her. "No problem, sir," Maya said quickly. "These gentlemen were just leaving." "Were they?" Castellano tilted his head slightly. "Seems like they were in the middle of a conversation. About me, if I heard correctly." The drunk men had gone pale, their earlier bravado evaporated like morning dew under a blowtorch. "We didn't mean anything by it," one stammered. "Just recognized you is all." "From the news," Castellano supplied, his voice still conversational. "Because I'm the mob guy, correct?" Maya stepped between them, a move so foolish she couldn't quite believe she was doing it. "Mr. Castellano, they're just drunk idiots who don't know what they're saying. Not worth your time." His amber eyes shifted to her for the first time, really seeing her. Maya felt a chill run down her spine, but held her ground. She was 5'6" to his 6-foot-something, dressed in a coffee-stained uniform, while he wore bespoke Italian wool, and yet some long dormant instinct made her lift her chin and meet his gaze directly. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maya? Maya Collins?" "Well, Maya Collins," he said. "You seem very eager to protect these gentlemen who just disrespected both of us." "I'm just trying to keep the peace in my diner," she replied, then added, "Sir?" One of the drunk men took the opportunity to slide out of the booth, clearly intending to make a break for the door. Without taking his eyes off Maya, Castellano made the slightest gesture with his hand, and his bodyguard moved to block the exit. "The thing is," Castellano continued, "I find disrespect troubling. It suggests a breakdown in the natural order of things." His gaze drifted back to the increasingly sober-looking men in the booth. "And when the natural order breaks down, someone needs to restore it." "Please," Maya said quietly, aware that every other patron in the diner was watching this unfold with horrified fascination. "Not here." Castellano studied her for a long moment. Then something unexpected happened. He smiled. It wasn't warm exactly, but it softened his features just enough to remind Maya that beneath the designer suit and the dangerous reputation was still a human being. "Since you asked so nicely," he said. Then, to the drunk men, "You have exactly 30 seconds to remove yourselves from my sight. I suggest you use them wisely." The 3 men practically fell over each other in their haste to exit, not even stopping to pay their bill. The bell jangled violently as the door slammed behind them. Castellano turned back to Maya. "You should be more careful about who you defend, Ms. Collins. Not everyone deserves your protection." "Thank you for your concern," she said, but I can handle myself." Another fleeting smile. "I'm sure you can." He reached into his jacket, and for a heart-stopping moment Maya thought he was reaching for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a leather wallet, extracted several $100 bills, and placed them on the table. "For the inconvenience, and their unpaid bill." Before Maya could respond, Castellano and his entourage were heading for the door. As they passed the elderly couple still nursing their pie, the old man flinched visibly, causing his coffee cup to rattle in its saucer. Castellano paused, his gaze settling on the couple. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice once again carrying that dangerous softness. The old man shook his head frantically, his weathered hands trembling. No problem, sir," the elderly woman answered, placing a protective hand over her husband's. "Harold's just got a bit of a tremor these days." Castellano's eyes narrowed as he studied them. "Have we met before?" The old man seemed to shrink in his seat. "No, sir." "Don't believe so." Something in Castellano's posture shifted, a predator sensing weakness. "You look familiar." "Harold, was it?" "Harold, what?" "Jennings," the old man whispered. "Harold Jennings." Recognition flickered in Castellano's eyes. "Jennings, from the Dock Workers Union, 1998. You testified against my father's interests." The color drained from Harold's face. "That was That was a long time ago, Mr. Castellano. Ancient history. Is it? Castellano leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. My father always said, history is written by those who survive to tell it. Tell me, Harold, how do you think your history ends? The elderly woman began to cry silently, still clutching her husband's hand. Harold looked as though he might pass out from fear. That's enough, Maya said, stepping forward again. The words left her mouth before she could consider the wisdom of interrupting Vincent Castellano twice in one night. The entire diner went still. Dolores actually gasped. Castellano turned slowly, his expression unreadable. Excuse me? I said that's enough, Maya repeated, surprised at the steadiness in her voice. Mr. and Mrs. Jennings are regular customers. They're good people. Whatever happened 25 years ago doesn't matter now. Not in my diner. Your diner? Castellano raised an eyebrow. I was under the impression this establishment had an actual owner. I've worked here for 8 years, Maya said. I've served the Jennings every Tuesday and Friday night for 6 of those years. They tip well, they're polite, and they've never caused a single problem. So yes, while I'm on shift, I consider it my responsibility to make sure all customers are treated with respect. She was acutely aware of how insane this was, standing up to a man who could probably have her killed with a phone call, but something inside her had snapped. Maybe it was the exhaustion of working double shifts all week. Maybe it was the memory of her 5-year-old daughter asking that morning why Mommy never had time to play anymore. Or maybe it was simply that, after years of letting people walk all over her, Maya Collins had finally found her breaking point. The diner was so quiet you could hear the slow drip of the coffee machine behind the counter. Castellano's bodyguard had moved slightly closer, his hand hovering near the bulge under his coat. The 2 suited men looked ready to intervene at the slightest signal from their boss. Castellano himself seemed almost amused. Respect, he repeated. An admirable quality, Miss Collins. I value it highly myself. Then show some, Maya said, gesturing to the elderly couple. Whatever Mr. Jennings did or didn't do 25 years ago, he's just an old man now, trying to enjoy a slice of pie with his wife. For a moment, Maya thought she'd pushed too far. Castellano's expression hardened, and she was suddenly acutely aware of just how dangerous this man truly was. But then he did something completely unexpected. He laughed. It was a short, surprised sound, as though her response had caught him completely off guard. You are either very brave or very foolish, Ms. Collins, he said. I'm neither, she replied. I'm just tired, and I'd like to finish my shift without any more drama. Castellano studied her for a moment longer, then nodded slightly. Very well. For tonight, the past is the past. He turned back to the Jennings, who were still frozen in fear. Consider yourself fortunate that Ms. Collins has such a strong sense of customer service. He adjusted his cuffs, a small, deliberate movement, then turned to leave. As he reached the door, he paused and looked back at Maya. I respect loyalty, Ms. Collins, even when it's misplaced. There was something in his tone, not quite a threat, but a promise of some kind. We'll speak again. And then they were gone, leaving only the frigid draft of January air swirling in their wake. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully, the sound absurdly normal after the tension of the previous moments. Maya realized she'd been holding her breath and exhaled slowly. The diner remained silent for several seconds, then burst into nervous chatter. Dolores hurried over, her eyes wide with disbelief. Have you completely lost your mind? She hissed. Do you know what that man is capable of? Before Maya could respond, she felt a weathered hand grasp her wrist. Mrs. Jennings was looking up at her with tear-filled eyes. Thank you, the elderly woman whispered. No one stood up for us like that in years. It's nothing, Maya said, suddenly embarrassed by the attention. I couldn't just stand there. Harold Jennings reached into his wallet with shaking hands and pressed several bills into Maya's palm. It's not enough, he said, his voice quavering. Nothing could be. But please take it. Maya looked down at the money, 3 $20 bills. For these elderly people living on a fixed income, it was probably a significant sum. She tried to hand it back, but Harold closed her fingers around the bills. For your little girl, he said. Sophia, right? You've shown her pictures. The fact that this elderly couple remembered her daughter's name when most customers couldn't even be bothered to look at her name tag brought a lump to Maya's throat. She nodded, tucking the money into her apron pocket. "Thank you," she said. "Now finish your pie. It's on the house tonight." The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Word of Maya's confrontation with Castellano spread quickly among the staff. Bobby emerged from the back, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. Joe the cook kept shaking his head and muttering about crazy, brave waitresses with death wishes. Dolores alternatively scolded Maya for risking her life and praised her courage, sometimes in the same breath. By the time 5 a.m. rolled around and Maya's replacement arrived for the morning shift, she was operating on autopilot, the adrenaline of the confrontation long since replaced by bone-deep exhaustion. She changed out of her uniform in the cramped employee bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, and gathered her things. "You sure you don't want me to call you a cab?" Dolores asked as Maya buttoned her worn wool coat. "After tonight, I wouldn't want to be walking alone." "I'll be fine," Maya assured her, though she wasn't entirely convinced herself. "It's only 6 blocks to my apartment, and it'll be light soon." "At least take this." Dolores pressed a small canister of pepper spray into Maya's hand. "My daughter gave it to me after my purse got snatched last year. I've got another at home." Too tired to argue, Maya pocketed the pepper spray and hugged Dolores goodbye. Outside, Chicago was still dark, the January air so cold it hurt to breathe. Maya pulled her scarf tighter around her neck and began the familiar walk home, her feet automatically navigating the route she'd taken thousands of times. The streets were eerily quiet at this hour, too early for the morning commute, too late for the night owls. The occasional passing car cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and Maya found herself jumping at the sound of trash cans being knocked over by the wind, or stray cats. Had she always been this jumpy, or was it the lingering effect of her encounter with Castellano? The rational part of her brain insisted she was overreacting. Surely a man like Vincent Castellano had more important concerns than a waitress who'd momentarily stepped out of line. But another part of her, the part that had developed finely tuned survival instincts growing up in one of Chicago's tougher neighborhoods, kept her hand wrapped around the pepper spray in her pocket and her eyes scanning the shadows. 4 blocks from the diner, Maya noticed a black sedan parked across the street, its engine running. She slowed her pace, heart hammering in her chest, as she considered crossing to the other side. Before she could decide, the car pulled away from the curb and disappeared around a corner. Probably just someone warming up their car before an early commute, she told herself, but her steps quickened nonetheless. By the time she reached her apartment building, a shabby but clean 4-story walk-up in a neighborhood that was neither dangerous nor particularly safe, the eastern sky had begun to lighten slightly. Maya fumbled with her keys at the building's entrance, the exhaustion making her fingers clumsy. Once inside, she climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, each step requiring more effort than the last. Mrs. Vasquez from next door was already up, and Maya could smell coffee brewing as she passed. The older woman often watched Sophia when Maya worked late shifts, an arrangement that saved Maya from having to pay for overnight childcare she couldn't afford. Tonight, as arranged, Sophia was sleeping over at Mrs. Vasquez's apartment rather than being transferred to their own place in the middle of the night. Maya would pick her up at 7:30, get Sophia ready for school, drop her off by 8:15, and then finally get some sleep before her afternoon shift started at 3 p.m. The endless juggling act of single motherhood and poverty left little room for error or rest. Inside her apartment, Maya went through the motions of her return-home routine. Coat hung up, shoes by the door, tip money counted and added to the jar labeled Sophia's College Fund that sat on the kitchen counter, more an act of faith than financial planning. She set her alarm, stripped off her clothes, and stepped into the shower, letting the hot water wash away the diner smells of coffee and grease and the lingering tension of the night's events. Clean but even more exhausted, Maya pulled on an oversized t-shirt and sweatpants, then collapsed into bed. She should try to sleep, She needed to be functional for Sofia in just a couple of hours, but her mind kept replaying the confrontation with Castellano. The look in his eyes when she'd challenged him, the way he'd said, "We'll speak again," before leaving. What had possessed her to stand up to him like that? Maya had always been careful, cautious, keeping her head down and focusing on survival. That approach had gotten her through an abusive childhood, a disastrous marriage to Sofia's father, and the daily grind of working poor existence. Standing up to a notorious crime boss didn't fit with her usual survival strategy. Yet something about those elderly patrons, their fear, their vulnerability, had triggered a protective instinct stronger than her fear. Maybe because they reminded her of the grandparents who had taken her in after her mother's death, giving her the only stable years of her childhood before they too passed away. Or maybe she was just fed up with bullies, having encountered too many in her 32 years. Whatever the reason, it was done now. And despite the potential consequences, Maya couldn't bring herself to regret it. There was a certain freedom in finally standing her ground, in saying enough after years of bending to the will of others. With that thought, she finally drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of amber eyes and elderly hands and a little girl asking why Mommy looked so sad all the time. The insistent buzzing of her alarm came far too soon. Maya groaned, fumbling to silence it, then forced herself to sit up. 7 a.m. Half an hour to become human before picking up Sofia. She splashed cold water on her face, brushed her teeth, applied minimal makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes, and pulled her hair into a fresh ponytail. Coffee. She needed coffee. Maya started the machine, then went to the window while it brewed, pulling back the curtain to check the weather. The January sky was clear but cold-looking, the kind of brittle blue that promised temperatures well below freezing. Sofia would need her heavy coat, hat, gloves. Maya's thoughts stuttered to a halt as her eyes registered the sleek black sedan parked directly across from her building. It looked suspiciously like the one she'd noticed during her walk home, though she couldn't be certain. What she could be certain of was that the vehicle hadn't been there when she arrived home, and no one typically parked on that side of the street during weekdays due to street cleaning regulations. As she watched, the driver's side window lowered slightly, and she caught a glimpse of a man in dark clothing. Was he watching her building? Watching her? The thought sent a chill down Maya's spine that had nothing to do with the January cold. The coffee machine beeped, pulling her attention away from the window. She poured herself a large mug, adding a splash of the milk that was dangerously close to its expiration date, and tried to think rationally. Chicago was full of black sedans. There was no reason to assume this one had anything to do with her or Castellano. She was letting her imagination run wild due to exhaustion and stress. Still, she found herself checking the window repeatedly as she got ready to pick up Sofia, relieved each time to see the car still there, because if it was still parked, whoever was inside wasn't currently coming for her. At 7:25, Maya left her apartment and knocked on Mrs. Vasquez's door. The elderly Cuban woman answered with a warm smile, already dressed for the day in a floral house dress despite the early hour. "There you are, Misha," she said. "Sofia is just finishing her breakfast. Come in, come in." Inside, Sofia sat at the small kitchen table, spooning the last of what appeared to be oatmeal into her mouth. At the sight of Maya, she broke into a wide smile that revealed the gap where her front tooth had recently fallen out. "Mommy," she exclaimed, jumping up to hug Maya around the waist. "Mrs. V made oatmeal with brown sugar and raisins." "Did she now?" Maya smiled, running a hand over her daughter's sleep-tousled hair. "Did you thank her?" "Yes," Sofia nodded emphatically, "and I helped wash the dishes." Mrs. Vasquez chuckled. "She is a good helper, this one. So polite." "Thank you for watching her," Maya said, meaning it with every fiber of her exhausted being. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "Psh!" Mrs. Vasquez waved away the thanks. "It is nothing. Sofia brings life to these old rooms." She pinched the little girl's cheek affectionately. "Now, go get your backpack, Nina. Your mother needs to get you to school." As Sofia scampered off to collect her things, Mrs. Vasquez lowered her voice. "You look tired, Maya." "More than usual." "Rough night at the diner," Maya said, not wanting to worry the older woman with tales of Mafia confrontations. "Nothing serious." Mrs. Vasquez looked skeptical, but didn't press the issue. "You should take better care of yourself." For her, she nodded in the direction Sophia had gone. "She notices more than you think." "I know," Maya sighed. "I'm trying." Sophia returned with her backpack and jacket, and after a final thank you to Mrs. Vasquez, they headed downstairs. Maya held Sophia's hand tightly as they exited the building, her eyes immediately going to the spot where the black sedan had been parked. It was gone. Relief washed over her, followed immediately by a new wave of anxiety. Where had it gone? Had the driver simply left? Or was he now watching from somewhere else? Was she being paranoid? "Mommy, you're squeezing too tight," Sophia complained, tugging her hand. "Sorry, sweetie." Maya loosened her grip. "Let's hurry so you're not late." The walk to Sophia's elementary school took about 15 minutes, during which Maya found herself constantly scanning their surroundings, checking reflections in store windows for anyone following them, and jumping at car horns and slamming doors. Sophia chatted away about her sleepover with Mrs. Vasquez and her plans for the day at school, blissfully unaware of her mother's hypervigilance. "And then we're going to make paper snowflakes for the winter showcase," Sophia was saying as they approached the school gates. "Ms. Patterson says mine were the best last year, so I'm going to show Lucy how to make the really fancy ones." "That sounds wonderful, baby," Maya said, kneeling to straighten Sophia's hat and scarf. "You be good today, okay? Listen to your teachers." "I always do." Sophia rolled her eyes in that way only a 5-year-old could perfect. "I know you do." Maya hugged her tightly, perhaps a bit longer than usual. "I love you so much." "Love you too, Mommy." Sophia squirmed, eager to join her friends who were already arriving. "Can I go now?" "Yes, go on." Maya released her, watching as Sophia ran toward a group of little girls gathered near the entrance. She waited until her daughter was safely inside the building before turning to head home. The walk back to her apartment felt longer somehow. Without Sophia's chatter to distract her, Maya's mind returned to the events at the diner and the mysterious black sedan. She found herself taking a slightly different road home, cutting through a small park rather than sticking to the main streets. It added a few minutes to her journey, but made her feel less exposed. By the time she reached her building again, Maya was nearly convinced she was overreacting. The lack of sleep was making her paranoid, seeing threats where none existed. Vincent Castellano probably hadn't given her another thought after leaving the diner. She was nobody to him, just a waitress who'd momentarily caught his attention. This reassuring train of thought came to an abrupt halt when Maya reached her apartment door. A small black envelope had been slipped underneath, the expensive paper stark against the worn hallway carpet. Her name, Ms. Maya Collins, was written on the front in elegant silver script. Maya stared at it, her heart hammering in her chest. She looked up and down the empty hallway, then carefully picked up the envelope, half expecting it to explode in her hands. It didn't, of course, but the weight of it felt dangerous nonetheless. Inside her apartment, she locked the door, secured the chain, and leaned against the wall, still holding the unopened envelope. How had it gotten there? Her building had security doors that required either a key or being buzzed in by a resident. Mrs. Vasquez wouldn't have let a stranger into the building, and none of the other neighbors knew Maya well enough to do so on her behalf, which meant whoever delivered this had either picked the lock on the building's entrance or had a key. Neither option was comforting. With trembling fingers, Maya opened the envelope. Inside was a single black card, made of some rigid material that felt more substantial than ordinary cardstock. One side was blank except for a small silver emblem in the corner, an ornate C surrounded by what looked like olive branches. On the other side, written in the same elegant silver script as the envelope, was a message. "Ms. Collins, your loyalty to your principles is noted and respected. Dinner, tonight, 8 p.m. A car will collect you at 7:30. VC." Maya read the message 3 times, trying to process what it meant. Was this an invitation or a command? The phrasing was polite enough, but there was no suggestion that she had any choice in the matter. "A car will collect you, not, 'Please let me know if you're available.'" She set the card on her kitchen counter and stared at it as though it might reveal additional information if she looked hard enough. Vincent Castellano wanted to have dinner with her. Vincent Castellano, who controlled half of Chicago's criminal enterprises, who had people disappeared for crossing him, who could crush her with less effort than it would take to swat a fly. Why? Because she'd stood up to him? That seemed unlikely. Men like Castellano didn't admire defiance. They eliminated it. Was this some elaborate setup for retribution against her perceived disrespect? But that didn't make sense either. If he wanted to harm her, he didn't need to invite her to dinner first. Maya's exhausted brain spun with possibilities, none of them particularly reassuring. She should ignore the invitation, pretend she never received it, take Sophia and go. Where? She had no money, no family, nowhere to run to. Or maybe she should call the police. Maya almost laughed at the thought. The Chicago PD's relationship with the Castellano family was complicated at best. Some officers were rumored to be on his payroll, and even the honest ones would think twice before moving against someone with his connections. Maya sank into a chair, the exhaustion of the night hitting her all at once. She needed to sleep, to clear her head, to think through this rationally. But the black card on her counter seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, making rest impossible. In the end, fatigue won out. Maya set her alarm for 2 p.m., giving her just enough time to pick up Sophia from school before her afternoon shift at the diner, and collapsed onto her bed. As sleep claimed her, one question echoed in her mind. What would Vincent Castellano do if she simply didn't show up for dinner? She woke disoriented, the alarm blaring in her ear. For a moment, Maya couldn't remember where she was or what day it was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat bolt upright, her gaze immediately going to her bedroom door as though expecting to find intruders. The apartment was quiet, except for the distant sounds of traffic and neighbors moving about their day. Maya shut off her alarm and rubbed her eyes. She had slept for nearly 6 hours, but it felt like minutes. Her body ached from tension, and a dull headache pulsed behind her temples. The black card was still on her kitchen counter where she had left it, so it hadn't been a dream after all. Maya picked it up again, running her thumb over the embossed silver emblem. What was she going to do? She didn't have time to decide right now. It was already 2 p.m., and she needed to pick up Sophia, drop her at Mrs. Vasquez's, and get to her shift at the diner by 3 p.m. Maya showered quickly, pulled her hair back into its usual ponytail, and put on a fresh uniform. Just another day, she told herself. Just get through it. But as she left her building, Maya couldn't help scanning the street for black sedans. There were none in sight, but that didn't stop the prickle of awareness at the back of her neck, the feeling of being watched. Sophia was full of energy when Maya picked her up from school, chattering about paper snowflakes and a math game they had played, and how Tyler had gotten in trouble for putting glue in Amelia's hair. Maya tried to focus on her daughter's stories, to be present in this moment, rather than consumed by anxiety about what awaited her that evening. "Can we get hot chocolate?" Sophia asked as they passed a cafe on their way to Mrs. Vasquez's apartment. "Not today, sweetie," Maya said automatically, already calculating the hours between now and when she'd get home after her shift. No time for detours if she wanted to be on time for work. Maybe this weekend. Sophia's face fell, and Maya felt the familiar pang of guilt that accompanied so many of her parenting decisions. Always rushing, always saying no, always choosing work over small pleasures because they couldn't afford both. "Actually, you know what?" Maya changed course abruptly, steering them toward the cafe. "Let's get that hot chocolate." Sophia's face lit up. "Really? But you said—" "I changed my mind," Maya smiled, the first genuine smile she'd managed since the previous night's confrontation. "We deserve a treat." Inside the cafe, Maya ordered a hot chocolate for Sophia and a black coffee for herself, adding a chocolate chip cookie to share when she saw how reasonably priced it was. They sat at a small table by the window, Sophia's legs swinging happily as she carefully blew on her hot drink. "Is today special?" Sophia asked, breaking the cookie in half and pushing the larger piece toward Maya. "Why do you ask?" "Because we never get treats on school days," Sophia explained with the straightforward logic of a child. "Only on special days." Maya considered the question. Was today special? It certainly wasn't ordinary. "I just wanted to spend a little extra time with my favorite person," she said finally, reaching across to tap Sophia's nose. Sophia giggled, chocolate foam coating her upper lip. "You're silly, Mommy." For 15 precious minutes, Maya allowed herself to forget about black cards and mafia bosses and impossible decisions. She focused entirely on her daughter, this miraculous little person who somehow remained joyful and kind, despite the hardships of their life. Sophia had Maya's dark curls and olive complexion, but her father's hazel eyes and stubborn chin. Thankfully, she had inherited none of his cruelty or selfishness. All too soon, it was time to leave. They dropped off the empty cups and plate and continued to Mrs. Vasquez's apartment. The elderly woman raised an eyebrow at Maya's harried appearance, but asked no questions, simply ushering Sophia inside with promises of helping her with her reading homework. "I'll be back around 10:30, Maya told her, the usual pickup time after her afternoon shift. Only as she hurried toward the diner did Maya fully process what she had just committed to. If she kept to her normal schedule, she would still be working when Castellano's car arrived to collect her. What would happen then? Would his men come to the diner, create a scene, force her to leave? Or would Castellano simply take her absence as a rejection of his invitation and a second act of defiance? The thought made Maya's stomach clench with fear. Once might be dismissed as an anomaly, possibly even amusing to a man in his position. Twice would be a pattern, a deliberate show of disrespect. She was still turning these options over in her mind when she pushed through the diner's doors at 2:55 p.m., 5 minutes before her shift was due to start. "There she is," Joe the cook called from behind the counter. "Chicago's bravest waitress." Or craziest, jury's still out. Several of the regular customers looked up at this announcement, their expressions ranging from curious to impressed. Word had clearly spread about last night's confrontation. "Not now, Joe," Maya muttered, hurrying to the back to stash her coat and purse. Dolores was just finishing her lunch shift, looking exhausted but relieved to see Maya. "Thank God you're here. I was starting to think maybe you'd—" "What? Been murdered in my sleep?" Maya tried for a light tone, but it fell flat. Dolores winced. "Sorry, it's just, after last night, we were all a little worried." "I'm fine," Maya assured her, though she felt anything but just tired. As they went through the usual shift change routine, counting the register, updating each other on customer issues, refilling condiments, Maya debated whether to tell Dolores about the black card. On one hand, she desperately wanted someone else's perspective on the situation. On the other, involving Dolores might put her at risk too. In the end, the need for advice won out. Once they were alone in the break room, Maya pulled the black card from her purse and showed it to Dolores. "This was under my door when I got home this morning," she said quietly. Dolores's eyes widened as she read the message. "Holy shit, Maya." She looked up, her expression a mixture of awe and horror. "Vincent Castellano invited you to dinner? Is that what this is? An invitation?" Maya ran a hand through her hair. "It feels more like a summons." "With men like Castellano, there's not much difference," Dolores said, handing the card back. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Maya admitted. "I can't just leave my shift, and I need to pick up Sophia by 10:30. "Are you insane?" Dolores interrupted. "Maya, honey, you can't just ignore this. Men like Vincent Castellano don't take rejection well, especially after you already stood up to him once." "So what, I'm supposed to just go have dinner with a crime boss? What does he even want with me?" Dolores sighed heavily. "I don't know. Maybe he was impressed by your backbone last night. Maybe he's curious about the waitress who wasn't afraid of him. Or maybe—" She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Maybe what?" Maya pressed. "Maybe he's interested in you," Dolores said reluctantly. "You know, personally." Maya stared at her. "That's ridiculous. I'm a waitress in a cheap diner. He's—" She gestured vaguely, unable to articulate the vast gulf between her world and Castellanos. "Rich men develop appetites for all sorts of things," Dolores said, her tone suggesting she had some experience with the subject. "And you're a beautiful woman, Maya." "Don't look so surprised. You know you are." Maya shook her head, dismissing the suggestion. "Even if that were true, which it isn't, I can't just abandon my responsibilities to go to dinner with a criminal, no matter how powerful he is." "Listen to me," Dolores said, gripping Maya's shoulders. "I can cover the rest of your shift. Frank owes me a favor. I'll get him to pick up Sophia from Mrs. Vasquez and watch her at your place until you get home." Frank was Dolores's son, a community college student who occasionally helped out at the diner. Maya had met him several times and trusted him well enough, but still, "I can't ask you to do all that," she protested. "You're not asking, I'm offering," Dolores said firmly, "because I don't want to see anything happen to you or that little girl of yours." The implication was clear. Refusing Castellanos' invitation could have consequences that extended beyond Maya herself. The thought of Sophia being affected by this situation was enough to make her reconsider. "Okay," Maya said finally, "but I'm going to call Mrs. Vasquez myself and let her know Frank will be picking up Sophia. And I'll need to stop by my apartment to change before—" She glanced at her watch. "Eurolacus, 7:30. Dolores nodded. "That's settled then. Now, you better get out there before Ron notices we're both hiding in the break room." For the next 3 hours, Maya went through the motions of her job on autopilot. She took orders, delivered food, refilled coffee cups, and cleaned tables with the efficiency of long practice, all while her mind raced with possibilities of what awaited her that evening. By 6 p.m. the dinner rush was winding down, and Dolores shooed her toward the door. "Go," she said. "You need time to get ready. And Maya," she added, as Maya was collecting her coat, "be careful. Whatever he wants, just be careful." Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The reality of what she was about to do was sinking in, and with it came a wave of fear that threatened to paralyze her. But what choice did she have? Run? Hide? Neither was a realistic option, not with Sophia to consider. She called Mrs. Vasquez from the diner's phone, explaining that a work emergency had come up and that Dolores's son, Frank, would be picking up Sophia instead. The elderly woman didn't question the story. Simply expressing concern for whatever work issues was serious enough to disrupt Maya's usual routine. "It's nothing bad," Maya assured her, the lie sticking in her throat. "Just a special event I need to help with. I'll make it up to Sophia this weekend." On her way home, Maya found herself walking faster than usual, constantly checking her watch. It was just past 6:15 p.m. when she reached her apartment building. That gave her just over an hour to get ready for whatever this was. A meeting, a date, an elaborate setup for revenge? Inside her apartment, Maya stood in front of her open closet, faced with a dilemma she'd never anticipated. What does one wear to dinner with a mafia boss? Her wardrobe consisted primarily of practical, inexpensive clothes suitable for waitressing or casual weekends with Sophia. She owned exactly one dress that might be considered appropriate for a nice dinner, a simple black wrap dress she'd bought for a cousin's wedding 3 years ago. Maya pulled it out, examining it critically. The dress was modest by most standards, knee-length with a V-neck that revealed just a hint of cleavage, but it was the most formal thing she owned. She laid it on the bed, then hurried to shower, scrubbing away the diner smells and applying extra care to her hair and minimal makeup. By 7:15 p.m., Maya was dressed, her dark curls loose around her shoulders rather than in her usual ponytail, a touch of mascara and lip gloss the extent of her makeup. She wore her only pair of heels, sensible black pumps that added just 2 inches to her height, and a simple gold pendant that had belonged to her grandmother. The overall effect, she decided, looking in the mirror, was respectable, but not trying too hard. Professional, almost. Which was good, because this was not a date. This was? Maya wasn't quite sure what this was, but she refused to treat it like a romantic encounter. Vincent Castellano might be accustomed to women fawning over his wealth and power, but she wasn't interested in playing that game. At 7:25 p.m., Maya grabbed her coat and purse and headed downstairs. Better to wait outside than have Castellano's driver come up to her apartment. She'd left a note for Frank explaining where the emergency key was hidden, what Sophia's bedtime routine entailed, and her cell phone number in case of any issues. The night air was bitterly cold, crystals of frost already forming on parked cars despite the early hour. Maya pulled her coat tighter around herself, wishing she'd thought to wear tights under her dress. She'd just begun to consider waiting in the lobby instead when a sleek black sedan, the same one she'd noticed earlier, she was certain, pulled up to the curb. The driver, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a face that suggested he'd seen his share of fights, stepped out and opened the rear passenger door without a word. "Ms. Collins?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle for his intimidating appearance. Maya nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "Mr. Castellano is expecting you," the driver said, gesturing to the open door. Taking a deep breath, Maya approached the vehicle. As she slid into the back seat, she half expected to find Castellano himself waiting for her. Instead, the seat beside her was empty. The car's interior as luxurious as she had anticipated, soft leather seats, subtle lighting, and the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. The driver closed her door and returned to his position behind the wheel. "It's about a 20-minute drive," he said, meeting her eyes briefly in the rearview mirror. "Make yourself comfortable." Maya had 100 questions she wanted to ask: where they were going, what Castellano wanted with her, whether she should be afraid, but something in the driver's manner suggested he wasn't the chatty type. Instead, she sat in silence, watching the familiar streets of her neighborhood give way to increasingly upscale areas of the city. They passed through the Gold Coast, where historic mansions shared space with luxury high-rises, then continued north along Lakeshore Drive. Maya had rarely ventured into this part of Chicago. The playground of the wealthy was as foreign to her as another country. Finally, the car turned into a private driveway, partially concealed by tall hedges. At the end of the drive stood an impressive limestone mansion, its windows glowing warmly against the cold January night. It wasn't ostentatious by the neighborhood standards, but it exuded old money and quiet power. The car stopped at the front entrance, where stone steps led up to a massive wooden door. Before Maya could reach for the handle, her door was opened by a uniformed staff member who offered his hand to help her out. "Ms. Collins," he said with a slight bow, "Mr. Castellano is waiting for you in the library. Please follow me." Maya stepped out of the car on legs that felt oddly disconnected from the rest of her body. This was really happening. She was about to have dinner with Vincent Castellano in what was presumably his home. The surreality of the situation almost made her laugh. 24 hours ago, she had been pouring coffee and serving pancakes to drunk college students. Now she was being escorted through a mansion that could have been featured in Architectural Digest. The interior was exactly what Maya would have expected from the exterior, tastefully decorated with antiques that looked genuinely old, rather than reproductions, oriental rugs that had probably cost more than her annual salary covering gleaming hardwood floors, and artwork that even her untrained eye could tell was valuable hanging on the walls. The staff member led her down a hallway and paused outside a set of double doors. "May I take your coat, Ms. Collins?" Maya hesitated, then nodded, slipping out of her worn wool coat with a sudden self-consciousness about its shabby condition compared to the luxury surrounding her. The man took it without comment, then opened one of the double doors. "Miss Collins has arrived, sir," he announced, stepping aside to allow Maya to enter. The library was a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive fireplace currently crackling with a warm fire, and several comfortable-looking leather armchairs arranged around a low table. Standing by one of the windows, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, was Vincent Castellano. He turned as she entered, and Maya was struck again by how ordinary he appeared at first glance. Dressed in dark slacks and a charcoal sweater, rather than the suit he'd worn at the diner, he looked more like a successful businessman than a feared crime boss. Only those amber eyes gave him away, watchful, calculating, missing nothing. "Ms. Collins," he said, setting his glass down and approaching her. Thank you for accepting my invitation. Maya found her voice at last. Did I have a choice? A smile flickered across Castellano's face. Everyone has choices, Ms. Collins, though I'll admit some are more appealing than others. He gestured toward one of the armchairs. Please sit. Would you like a drink? I have an excellent scotch, or wine, if you prefer. Perhaps something non-alcoholic? Water is fine, Maya said, perching on the edge of the indicated chair, her back straight and tense. Castellano nodded to the staff member who disappeared, returning moments later with a crystal glass of water for Maya, and refreshing Castellano's scotch before departing again, closing the door behind him. An awkward silence fell. Maya sipped her water, hyper-aware of Castellano watching her with those unsettling amber eyes. You're wondering why I asked you here, he said finally. The thought had crossed my mind, Maya replied, striving for a neutral tone. Castellano took the chair opposite hers, his movements fluid and controlled. I've been trying to decide that myself, he admitted, surprising her. My first instinct, when someone shows disrespect, is usually less civilized. A chill ran down Maya's spine despite the warmth of the fire. But you, he continued, studying her over the rim of his glass, you weren't disrespecting me, were you? You were protecting someone, the Jennings. Maya nodded cautiously. They're good people. Regular customers. Good people, Castellano repeated, as though testing the phrase. And you decided they deserved your protection, even at the risk of offending someone like me. I didn't really think about the consequences, Maya admitted. I just reacted. Loyalty and courage, Castellano said thoughtfully. Rare qualities these days, even rarer when they're genuine rather than motivated by self-interest. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Miss Collins, what do you know about me? Maya hesitated, unsure how to answer. Did he want honesty or flattery? In the end, she opted for a version of the truth. Only what everyone in Chicago knows, that you run various businesses, some legitimate, some less so. That you're powerful, that people who cross you tend to regret it. Castellano nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. And knowing all that, you still stood up to me. Fascinating. Before Maya could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. Enter, Castellano called. The same staff member appeared. Dinner is served, sir. Thank you, James. Castellano stood, extending a hand to Maya. Shall we? Maya ignored the offered hand, rising on her own. If Castellano was offended by this small act of independence, he didn't show it, merely gesturing for her to precede him out of the library. They walked down another hallway to a dining room that managed to be both impressive and oddly intimate. The long table that could have seated 20 was set for just 2, at one end rather than separated by its full length. Candles provided most of the illumination, their light reflecting off fine china and crystal glassware. Castellano held out Maya's chair for her, a gesture she reluctantly allowed. Once she was seated, he took his own place at the head of the table, close enough that they could converse without raising their voices, but not so close as to seem presumptuous. Almost immediately, the first course appeared, an elegant soup that Maya couldn't identify, but found delicious. The staff moved with the practiced efficiency of a high-end restaurant, removing plates and replacing them with new courses, before Maya had even registered they needed changing. Throughout the meal, Castellano kept the conversation surprisingly light. He asked about her background, without pressing when she gave only vague answers, her interests, her thoughts on various neutral topics like books and music. Not once did he mention the diner, the Jennings, or anything related to his business dealings, legitimate or otherwise. It was, Maya realized with a start, the most civil dinner conversation she'd had in years. Most of her meals were eaten standing up between serving customers or sitting with Sophia while half-watching cartoons. When was the last time she'd discussed a book she'd enjoyed with another adult? Or shared an opinion about a new restaurant in the neighborhood? Despite her initial terror and continuing wariness, Maya found herself gradually relaxing as the meal progressed. Castellano was articulate and well-informed, with a dry sense of humor that occasionally surprised a genuine laugh from her. Had she met him under different circumstances, not knowing who he was or what he did, she might have even enjoyed his company. This thought brought her up short, reminding her why she was really here and who she was really with. Vincent Castellano hadn't invited her to dinner because he wanted pleasant conversation about books and music. There was a purpose behind this elaborate charade of normalcy. As if sensing her renewed tension, Castellano signaled to the staff, who cleared away the dessert plates and discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone with coffee and brandy that Maya hadn't touched. "You've relaxed somewhat over dinner," Castellano observed, "but now you're remembering to be afraid again. Why is that, Miss Collins?" "Because this isn't normal," Maya said, deciding honesty was her best approach. "People like you don't invite people like me to dinner without a reason." "People like me?" One eyebrow raised slightly. "And what kind of person am I, exactly?" Maya met his gaze directly. "A dangerous one." Castellano smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face, making him appear younger and almost approachable. "You really aren't afraid to speak your mind, are you?" "I've found that pretending usually makes things worse in the long run," Maya said. "A philosophy I share," Castellano nodded. "Which brings us to why I asked you here tonight." Here it comes, Maya thought, bracing herself. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Collins," he said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. "One that could significantly improve your financial situation and provide better opportunities for your daughter." Maya stiffened. "How do you know about my daughter?" "I make it my business to know things," Castellano said simply. "Sophia, age 5, currently attending Lincoln Elementary School. Father not in the picture. You work double shifts to make ends meet, leaving precious little time for either rest or quality time with your child." He noted her alarmed expression and added, "I assure you, my interest is purely informational. I like to know who I'm dealing with." Maya's heart raced. The casual way he mentioned Sophia made it clear this wasn't just about Maya anymore. Whatever game Castellano was playing, he'd made sure she understood that her daughter was within his reach as well. "What kind of proposition?" she asked, her voice steady despite her fear. "I'm in need of someone with your particular qualities," Castellano said. "Loyalty, courage, discretion, and a certain authenticity that is rare in my usual circles." "For what purpose?" "I host various social and business functions throughout the year, events where having someone who can observe and report back on the guests' true natures would be invaluable." Maya frowned, confused. "You want me to spy on your guests?" "Spy is such a melodramatic term," Castellano said with a slight smile. "I prefer to think of it as providing insights. People behave differently around those they perceive as staff or service workers. They reveal their true character in how they treat those they consider beneath them." He leaned forward slightly. "You've observed this yourself, haven't you, in your years at the diner?" Maya couldn't deny it. She'd seen countless examples of people's true natures revealed in how they treated waitstaff. The businessmen who were charming to colleagues but snapped at servers. The apparently loving couples who turned vicious the moment they thought no one important was watching. "Yeah, and what would this position entail exactly?" she asked cautiously. "You would attend my events in various capacities, sometimes as waitstaff, sometimes as a guest, depending on the situation. You would observe, listen, and report anything of interest directly to me." Castellano took a sip of his brandy. "In return, you would receive a substantial salary, comprehensive health insurance for both you and Sophia, and a college fund for your daughter that would ensure she can attend any university she qualifies for." Maya's mind reeled at the implications. Financial security, health insurance, a future for Sophia that didn't depend on tip money saved in a jar. It was everything she had ever wanted for her daughter, offered by a man whose business dealings were almost certainly illegal and definitely dangerous. "And if I refuse?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Castellano's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A hardening, a return to the cold calculation she'd glimpsed at the diner. "Then we part ways, and you return to your life as it was. No better, no worse." He was lying. Maya knew it with absolute certainty. A man like Castellano didn't accept rejection gracefully, especially after going to such lengths. If she refused him now, after he'd revealed his interest in her and knowledge of Sofia, there would be consequences. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. Castellano nodded, as though he'd expected this response. "Of course, take 48 hours. I'll send a car on Friday evening for your answer." He set his brandy glass down and stood, indicating their dinner was concluded. "In the meantime, consider this a gesture of good faith." He removed an envelope from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. Maya didn't reach for it. "What is that?" "Information about Harold Jennings that might interest you," Castellano said. "Consider it a demonstration of my resources and my willingness to share them with those who prove their value." Curiosity won out over caution. Maya picked up the envelope and opened it, finding several sheets of paper inside. As she scanned the contents, her eyes widened. There were bank statements, court records, and what appeared to be confidential medical documents, all relating to Harold Jennings. "Mr. Jennings worked for my family's shipping company in the late 1990s, Castellano explained as Maya read. "He was accused of embezzlement. Nearly $500,000 disappeared under his watch. When confronted, he turned state's evidence, claiming my father had forced him to participate in various illegal activities. His testimony led to a federal investigation that cost my family considerably in both legal fees and business opportunities." Maya looked up, confused. "But if he testified against your father, why wasn't your father convicted?" "Because Jennings was lying," Castellano said simply, "as the documents in your hand prove. He was the one embezzling funds, using offshore accounts and falsified records to hide his activities. By the time the federal investigation concluded, the money was gone, and Jennings had disappeared into the witness protection program." Maya flipped through the papers, seeing evidence of large deposits to accounts in the Cayman Islands, withdrawals that coincided with Jennings' testimony dates, and finally, medical records indicating treatment for gambling addiction at a private facility in Arizona. "He lost it all at casinos in Vegas and Atlantic City," Castellano continued, "then tried to save himself by turning on my father. When that didn't work out as planned, he and his wife entered witness protection. They returned to Chicago 5 years ago, apparently believing enough time had passed that no one would recognize them." Maya set the papers down, her mind trying to reconcile the quiet, seemingly harmless old man from the diner with the person described in these documents. "Why are you showing me this?" "To demonstrate that appearances can be deceiving," Castellano said. "The good people you were so eager to protect have secrets of their own, just as I'm not quite the monster your imagination painted me to be." Maya wasn't so sure about that last part, but she couldn't deny that the information had shaken her perception of the Jennings. If it was true and the documentation seemed compelling, then the elderly couple she'd defended weren't innocent victims, but people who had once engaged in criminal activity themselves. "I believe our business for the evening is concluded," Castellano said, moving toward the door. "James will show you out. The car will return you to your apartment." Maya stood, still processing everything that had happened. "And on Friday?" "I'll expect your answer," Castellano finished for her. "Choose wisely, Ms. Collins, for both your sake and Sofia's." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Maya nodded stiffly, gathering the papers and following Castellano out of the dining room. James was waiting in the hallway, her coat already retrieved and draped over his arm. As she slipped into her coat, Maya noticed Castellano watching her with an unreadable expression. "One last thing, Ms. Collins," he said as she prepared to leave. "That courage you showed at the diner, defending those you believed deserved protection, even at personal risk, that's a quality I respect. It's also a quality that could get you killed in my world. Think carefully about where your loyalties lie before you make your decision." With that cryptic warning, he turned and walked away, leaving Maya to follow James back to the waiting car. The drive back to her apartment passed in a blur, Maya's mind too full of conflicting thoughts and emotions to register the passing scenery. Vincent Castellano had offered her financial security and a bright future for Sofia in exchange for what amounted to corporate espionage with potentially lethal consequences. He'd also revealed information about people she had considered innocent that complicated her understanding of good and evil, right and wrong. As the car pulled up to her building, Maya realized she'd been clutching the envelope of documents so tightly that her fingers had left creases in the paper. She smoothed them out absently before returning them to the envelope. "We'll return on Friday evening, Ms. Collins," the driver said as he opened her door. 8 o'clock. Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and hurried into her building. The warmth of the shabby lobby enveloped her, familiar and comforting after the cold elegance of Castellano's mansion. She climbed the stairs slowly, her mind still racing with possibilities and consequences. Outside her apartment door, Maya paused, taking a deep breath to compose herself before facing Frank and Sophia. She didn't want her daughter to see her distress or sense that anything was wrong. Inside, she found Frank sitting on the couch, textbooks spread around him as he studied quietly. He looked up as she entered, relief evident on his face. "Hey, Maya," he said, keeping his voice low. "Sophia's been asleep for about an hour. She was great. We did her homework, had some mac and cheese for dinner, and read 3 bedtime stories before she conked out." "Thank you so much," Maya said, genuine gratitude in her voice as she hung up her coat. "I really appreciate you stepping in like this." "No problem. Mom explained it was a work emergency." Frank gathered his books, showing no curiosity about what kind of work emergency would require a waitress to dress up and be gone for several hours. Either Dolores hadn't shared her suspicions with him, or he was being deliberately tactful. After Frank left, Maya checked on Sophia, finding her daughter peacefully asleep, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched tightly to her chest. Standing in the doorway, watching the gentle rise and fall of Sophia's breathing, Maya felt the full weight of her impossible choice. Accept Castellano's offer and secure Sophia's future at the cost of involving herself with a dangerous criminal enterprise. Refuse and risk his displeasure while condemning both of them to continued financial struggle. Neither option seemed right. Maya closed Sophia's door quietly and went to her own bedroom, changing out of her dress and into comfortable pajamas. She made herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, spreading out the documents Castellano had given her. The evidence against Harold Jennings was comprehensive and damning. Bank transfers that coincided with missing funds from the Castellano Shipping Company, gambling losses documented by casino credit records, medical evaluations for compulsive gambling disorder. It painted a picture of a desperate man who had stolen money to feed his addiction, then betrayed his employer to escape the consequences. If true, it meant that Maya had stood up to Vincent Castellano to protect a thief and a liar. But did that make her action wrong? Harold Jennings might have been guilty of crimes in the past, but that didn't mean he deserved to be threatened and intimidated as an elderly man. People could change. They could regret their actions, try to build better lives. Just as Maya was considering calling Dolores to discuss her dilemma, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Ms. Collins." Vincent Castellano's voice was instantly recognizable, sending a jolt of adrenaline through Maya's system. "I hope I'm not calling too late." "How did you get this number?" Maya asked, then immediately regretted the question. Of course, he would have her number. He probably had her entire life history at his fingertips. "I wanted to add something to our conversation," Castellano continued, ignoring her question. "A detail I neglected to mention earlier." Maya waited, her grip on the phone tightening. "The position I'm offering is not permanent," he said. 2 years. After that time, you would be free to leave my employment with a significant bonus payment and excellent references for any career path you might wish to pursue. Your daughter's college fund would remain intact, regardless of your decision to stay or go." "Why are you telling me this now?" Maya asked, suspicion coloring her voice. "Because I saw your face when I mentioned Sophia," Castellano replied, his tone surprisingly gentle. "You were afraid I was threatening her. I wasn't. My interest in your daughter extends only to ensuring her welfare as part of our arrangement. I don't harm children, Ms. Collins. nor do I threaten them to control their parents." Maya wasn't sure she believed him, but the clarification was somewhat reassuring nonetheless. 2 years, she repeated, and then I'm free to leave. No consequences. Precisely. Think of it as a particularly lucrative temporary position, one that would change your circumstances permanently. There was a pause. The choice is still yours, Ms. Collins. I'll await your answer on Friday. The line went dead before Maya could respond. She set down her phone, staring at the documents spread across her kitchen table. 2 years. Financial security, health insurance, a college fund for Sophia, and then freedom to walk away. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Men like Vincent Castellano didn't make generous offers without expecting significant returns. Whatever he wanted from her, it was likely more complex and dangerous than he'd implied. But as Maya gathered up the papers and prepared for bed, she couldn't help weighing the risks against the potential benefits. 2 years of her life in exchange for securing Sophia's future. Was that a price she was willing to pay? Maya fell asleep, still turning the question over in her mind. No closer to an answer than when she'd arrived home. In her dreams, she stood at a crossroads, Sophia's hand in hers, while a figure with amber eyes watched from the shadows, waiting for her to choose her path.